Hello, everyone. So, we'll be continuing our lecture where we left off. So, last time we were talking about some different aspects and characteristics of urban sprawl and what are the potential consequences of urban sprawl if it is left uncontrolled. So, that raises the question, how do we manage it? So, uh, according to the previous lectures, we have now know that there are some environmental and social costs of urban expansion, and which has become kind of a key issue for sustainable urban development. So in the 21st century, the metropolitans and its urban development of the metropolitan, basically of the world dominant cities, all the development is mostly now low density suburban or peri-urban development, and which sometimes we have referred to as sprawl. So the a crucial question which arises is, how do we make it more sustainable? The expansions, the growth, how do we make it more sustainable? So the last century basically has witnessed evolution within this urban growth management discourse, and large number of cities have tried different techniques to achieve sustainable urban forms. And the most impact on such type of development is the market driven development, and the capital economic development. The economic climate is basically constraining the ability of the planners to have a sustainable urban development. So, planning authorities have sometimes perceived as an obstacle to development by the governments which are uh, concerned with economic growth of the country. So, planning authority is sometimes the planning authority decisions on urban or suburban development can facilitate growth management or can hinder growth management strategies. So, depending upon the support of the government, here the politicians have a huge role in governing urban expansion policies. So, as a planner, we are much more concerned with making the human activities or the urban expansion more environmentally friendly, socially acceptable or responsible, and economically sound in the long run. So that points out to the first tragedy being used in the world, introduced in the world post World War II era, which was called limits to the growth, in which we are working towards constraining the growth. We're putting some limit to the growth, that no growth can happen outside this particular area or particular zone. So that the most popular tool which was developed was basically a strip of green or undeveloped land in which no further growth would be allowed. That green strip was basically called green belts in the era of in the United Kingdom, the pioneers, and it has the basis in the ideas behind the Ebenezer Howard of the Garden City. So the first proposal of limit to growth was basically the green development, the green belts. So according to the UK Physical Land Use Planning System and Act, the country formalized that green belts will be developed around the cities to limit the urban growth, to contain the urban expansion. And that construct was often complemented by kind of creating new satellite towns outside the boundaries. So to contain already developed area within a certain green belt. So now the first of these such new towns were the they were developed basically by the name of Letchworth in UK, and that ideology later spread to the USA. And Radburn was developed on the ideas of the green belt development. So with a proposed by the Garden City concept, the Ebenezer Howard. So these were one of the most well-known towns of those era. So that Also, so UK was the first one to give the idea, and then they started constructing or proposing or developing this kind of green belts around city centers, around big urban areas and counties. So the in UK, the first green belt was proposed on the by the London County in 1935, and it's still being effective today. And that is one of the main tool to control urban expansion in the city of London. So this is another map is showing the different green belt, which is limiting the growth. We have this is this old city center, followed by inner ring, followed by suburban ring, and then by the green belt. So that green belt is basically limiting future expansion of London. So this was the Greater London Plan in the 19th of 19. I think it was 19. But yes, it was developed by the Patrick Abercrombie, another planner. If you go into the history of urban planning, so Patrick Abercrombie was the one who developed it back in 1944. This Greater London Plan, with an emphasis on green belt development, which will limit the growth of the city. And later it spread to the other areas as well. People in Portland, USA, they also proposed that we should have a green belt which will limit the growth of the city. Another in Toronto, this is Toronto, in which it limit they like put a green belt again with certain radius with certain width around the city just to limit the growth of the city. This is also implemented in Seoul in South Korea, in which the capital city is being limited. There is uh, the green belt is basically limiting the expansion of the city. So as the city is running out of space, so people have started because of the higher housing demand and the need, they have shifted towards the vertical development. So green belt kind of im- imposed on the city to move from horizontal growth and limiting the sprawl towards the vertical development. Ottawa, the capital of Canada, they've also put a limit, and they have also constructed kind of the new towns in the outskirts, but the city is limited again by a very huge green belt. And other cities have also proposed that what should be the width? Should it be like width should be constant? Should it be well, it all depends upon the potential of development. If there is a highest potential of development in some place, the width will vary according to that potential, which then brings us to the critique. Was the green belt the best plan, or was it the best plan of that time? So of course, every policy or a measure also have goods and bads. So critique. What were the shortcomings of this technique? So although this technique or this policy measure or planning measure tool, you can call it, have been implemented in like London, it has also been used in some European countries like Copenhagen and Amsterdam, and this is also in America in San Francisco, and in Australia, Adelaide and Dunedin in New Zealand. They have constructed or they have implemented green belts in an attempt to curb urban sprawl. So, but it all of these policy measures or this were like depending upon certain conditions. So, firstly was that construction of new towns outside the green belts would pose kind of a barrier, and it would create large distances for people which are employed in the city centers. So, the traveling within these distances became more and more, and the success. Some researchers have also emphasized that the greenbelt approach as a tool for containing urban development is very much dependent on the relationship between the government and the market. So market can influence construction of or you can say development in those green areas, but it all depends upon how much government is firm to limit the market. Should it be free market or should government limit it? So uh, and that also sometimes posed a problem when in the absence of regional development plans, this the setting up of new satellite towns or development in the outskirts would drastically impact your regional planning objectives. So it also kind of this city must be in line with the regional development objectives. So if there is no regional development authority or the planning objective do not match, so this green belt might not be more much applicable in that context. So basically in Pakistan, because we have this no regional development planning authority, so for that purpose green belt might not be a very good measure to curb the urban sprawl. So now it brings us to our next generation, which were also called urban growth boundaries, another kind of a limit to the urban sprawl. So the main uh, purpose of this urban growth boundary was to limit the growth by constructing some kind of institutional boundary in this city. So no development can be allowed outside that particular institutional boundary. So it started in the early 1970s, mostly in the USA, and it was introduced as a placing a limit on a growth that is needed. But this emerged basically because in that era there was a paramount shift towards the decentralization of growth management and a shift of planning policies from a centrally planned government toward more bottom-up planning, where authorities assumed more responsibility for spatial planning and therefore the urban growth. Now, these edges or boundaries, institutional boundaries, can be uh, constructed or they can be developed. The city limits, you can call it, and the sole purpose was containing all the development within that city limit, and all of this that would able to help contain the sprawl and redirect all the outgoing development towards infill development, and we can have a more integrated and compact urban form. So lot of states in the US started this, but Oregon in and Florida systems are quoted in the research as excellent models for controlling urban growth using this kind of development. But the critical, you can say, the main success factor behind this type of urban growth management strategy is that uh, development in outskirts, outside the particular boundary, how important, how stringent is it, how uh, strict it is that no development can be done outside that city limit. So that the I just quoted about the Oregon and Florida systems. They were uh, considered best for controlling the urban sprawl, notably because the local governments of the cities, they coordinated well with the neighboring localities or neighboring you can say councils or local governments, in which they enacted policy consistent within the local and the state level urban planning laws or urban planning strategies or spatial level strategies. So that became a crucial success factor in containing urban sprawl because state and the local government, they were on the same foot. So a very good coordination between regional organization and the local organization, that would be only possible. This kind of management strategy can only be possible if both of these organizations or state and um local levels, they are very much coordinated and they are very much in agreement with each other. Okay, so this Portland metropolitan area, the region of the Oregon basically state, they provided the boundary limit which limited the growth of the city. Similarly, Sydney has also put some kind of radial boundaries which will limit certain development in certain, you can say, radius. Such type of development can be done. City of Salem, again in USA, it also developed, or you can say imposed, a very strict boundary in which no development can be done outside the city limits. In Brazil as well, in Brazil, Sao Paulo, they've also constructed the city limits in which we are seeing that they are not allowing development outside the city limits. Okay, that raises again, of course, this policy also has its pros and cons. That what So the primary factor of success factor, as we talked about, is the coordination between the regional planning agency and the local planning agency. So, so one of the main critique of this uh, management strategy is that the inner land becomes very expensive and the poor people have to be displaced. And if there is no strict control outside the city limits, the people will start settling outside, and that might again turn into leapfrog development. But if there is strict control, the probability of the property in the outskirts will go down, and poor people, they won't have any place to afford. They won't be able to afford living in that city sometimes. So so this brings us to the one of the latest, or you can say the most cited management strategy is, which is called smarter growth, which uses different kind of principles in defining the management strategy according to the context and according to the situation. So what is this approach about? So basically, it originated from the US again, and this states that growth should not be entirely stopped in the tracks like these other approaches, which have limited, or you can say constrained, or put a stop of the expansion. So the smarter growth strategy or approach claims that urbanization should not be stopped in its tracks or slowed down. So it should be managed. So that gave it to some goals or principles behind smart urban growth strategies, in which it is emphasized that a compact, intensified, and mixed use development must be done to have a high density development in the city centers, followed by some walkable neighborhoods in the surroundings, which will be connected through transits or public transportation systems, and encourage the use of biking and mass transit that will reduce the overall traffic in the city, and take use of the compact urban development like high-rise buildings, and also we are limiting the urban sprawl. So how can that be limited? We should promote such strategies. We should not sacrifice the economic growth, but we should promote strategies which will promote economic growth as well as reduce the per capita consumption of land and energy. So that can limit the urban sprawl. And rather than limiting all of that city in expansion, we should just preserve open spaces, important farmlands, agriculture areas, fertile lands, national scenic areas, or critically environmental areas with special species, flora and fauna, so that we might have some protected areas in the cities. Promote urban renewal and public health in the old city centers, and give wide of housing opportunities and choices to the public, so they can every type of people can afford living in the city. And make for sustainability purposes, we should have development decisions fair, like good governance, concepts of good governance, and we should incorporate or encourage citizen participation and stakeholders collaboration in making urban development decisions of the city. So now these goals are basically very like kind of customizable, and depending upon the government they can customize it, but at the back end the main goals should be there, and small objectives can be set up to achieve these goals. So this is the strategy in which urbanization should be managed, not restricted. It should be managed effectively. So it's nowadays more of our planning strategies are on the line of this phenomena of smart urban growth. But now the main issue which rises in the uh, developing and developed countries, are these all these strategies are being proposed by the Western countries. So is it applicable to just use that strategies and just implement in case of developing countries like Pakistan? So when these cities were these strategies were proposed in the Western countries, UK, Europe, and USA, they had different population growth rates, different scales. And in case of developing countries, especially in Asian countries, we have rapid urban growth rates, we have higher rate of urbanization, and lower economic powers per capita income as compared to the developed countries. So that uh, bring us to different problems which might arise in adopting such kind of policies or strategies. So the first point is we should not blindly just adapt the models or policies or strategies given by the developed countries. And sometimes these complex policies which needs a lot of data at the back end, which is not sometimes available in context to developing countries, those planning policies are just implementing on ground without not in the true spirit, and often driven by the bureaucracies to just implement certain policy. And that policies, because we are just copying it, we are not getting local inputs, so we are not contextualizing according to our local conditions. So that might pose a problem in accepting these approaches of green belt limits and smarter growth. And another agenda often sometimes uh, given by the even by the planners, politicians, and many other professionals as well, that sprawl should not be stopped. It's but sprawl is, or built up area or development is kind of an indicator for an economic growth. So because the developing countries, they don't have enough economic development, they are they are saying that we should not stop the sprawl. So urban sprawl, that is, there is no such thing as urban sprawl. It is healthy urban growth or urbanization. And then in some of these policies, green belts, because of their limits to growth, they will raise the prices and land prices, and the poor people won't have any areas to live. So the developing countries, they are not ready for this right now. Developing countries, they are not ready to take the risk. So where will how they will accommodate a lot of population. And this again raises to the uh, another question, that in old cities or traditional cities, especially in the Chinese, this uh, southeast east countries, where your city centers are already highly dense, so it makes no point to already have a development or infill development in in those areas. So a lot of development is already there, so it would be very difficult to raise the densities. Again, because of these different strategies, there is the cost of commuting distance from their employment center to the housing. So if we employ certain kind of this urban growth, urban this belt, urban green belts basically, so people will have to commute daily, and it will require a lot of time, energy, as well as cost. So the people, already poor people or relatively poor people in the developing countries, they are not going to afford living in the city, and if they start living outside, they cannot travel daily to reach their employment center. That will incur or kind of add on the burden to the poor citizens. Okay, and governments are prioritizing accommodation accommodating growing urban population. So most of the fastest growing urban populations are in the developing countries. So Here, a lot of accommodation, a lot of urbanization is encouraged, and environmental conservation kind of takes a back seat, in which people are more into survival than worrying about the environment. So we have this phenomena. So these are some of the differences in which these developed countries' models strategies should not be blindly taken, but rather customized. So some smarter growth principles can be adopted, some goals can be adopted and contextualized, customized according to the local needs with the feedback of the public. So based on say, these different models and strategies we have revisited in the developed countries, what would be the lesson learned for our countries? So what should a developing country do? So alternative this vision of growth management in terms of smart growth is emerging in the local planning practices. uh, the we should think about critically understanding what is are the present day realities of the country or of the cities in developing countries, then employing such kind of policies. So in Asian megacities, we have managed or we have attempted to manage metropolitan growth by applying these Western urban planning concepts, such as this green belt and zoning, in response to the rapid migration of people from rural to urban areas. But it might not be the best solution in Asian countries, that we should not just blindly follow these policies. But now it is being emerged that these urban policies should shift from containing urban growth to guiding it or managing it. So that is the philosophy behind urban management growth strategies. Then instead of just limiting it or stopping it or imposing strictness, it has not resulted good lessons in the developed countries. So in developing countries, we should be cautious enough to just not implement those strategies in context of our country, but we should try to learn more from them. How have they managed to shift toward the smart urban growth? And of course, those smart urban growth will have their own critique, will have their own issues, but we should learn from them and customize and develop our own integrated urban planning policies. So thank you very much.